It is November the 15th, 2013. I am Steve Gerweck, the webmaster of www.gerweck.net, Gerweck.net, your source on the World Wide Web for all your pro wrestling news since 1997. And today it's a pleasure of mine to welcome a very special guest to Gerweck.net. We, of course, talked to Brian Kendrick last year, the tag team partner of this individual. He is a former WWE tag team champion, a Cruiserweight champion, just recently returned to Ring of Honor, has been wrestling all over the world, recently with Pro Wrestling Guerrilla as well. And today it's a very special pleasure to welcome to Gerweck.net the one and only Paul London. How you doing today, Paul?
I am doing fantastic. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, as they say.
Great. Well, we appreciate your time. As I mentioned there earlier, we had an interview with your former tag team partner, Brian Kendrick, and he said definitely talk to Paul. Paul's a great interview, and we've been listening to some of your previous interviews, and you're a very lively guy. And I think, looking at your career, a very interesting career. As I said before, you were in Ring of Honor, and just recently returned to Ring of Honor, WWE, TNA, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, wrestled all over the world. So the first question I always like to ask is, you've been in the business for, 13, 14 years now. How you doing physically? How's the body holding up?
Yeah, that's really stellar. That's what you go to first. That's what you focus on because, it's getting up there.
Well, because I'm concerned about you, Paul.
Well, I guess if you've seen me in matches, you see the bumps that I take, or the falls that I take. That hasn't really let up. To answer your question, my body's holding up. I myself I'm constantly getting a little bit older, but at a rapid pace. But physically, I feel good. It takes me longer to warm up, but that's really the only difference. Is Shane Battier, for the Heat, he said in an interview that as you get older, the will to compete never wanes. It's the will to prepare to compete that wavers as you get older, So it's not to say that my drive isn't there anymore, or the hunger level isn't there anymore. It's just that as my body gets older and the abuse that it's taken sets in, I have to prepare much differently. I was just thinking about this yesterday, actually, because I went for a jog, and I'm not a big runner. It runs in my family. My dad's a marathon runner. My brother's a marathon runner. My stepmom's a marathon walker. Probably a mall walker too. I don't know. But I've always just been in the weight room or a climber. I do run, obviously, but it's just never been my method of working out. But anyways, I went for a run yesterday for about 5 miles, remembering why it is I don't run. Because my body started, my hips and my back, my lower back, always take a beating. But, I hurt my lower back when I was in amateur wrestling in high school. I injured my sciatic nerve. And so that's something I've always dealt with throughout my pro wrestling career. But again, that's just a matter of educating yourself and learning the proper techniques to warm up, to stretch. It really is a matter of mastering your body and being really in tune with it. Look at Van Damme. Look how much older he is, but yet he still goes full steam. Just top notch, and he's awesome. Rob is just awesome, but he takes care of his body. He is really the master of his body. His body is his temple. I'm sure if you asked him, he'd say the same thing. I know it's a very long answer, but yeah, my hips are hurting a bit. My lower back is always a bit tight. But overall, I feel really, really good. I feel physically that I'm reaching the peak of where I've been physically my entire life. So I have my dips, but I try and maintain a high level of fitness and athleticism at all times. It's just sometimes you're not competing, So you gotta do other things, climb trees, chase dogs,
Absolutely. You gotta do what you gotta do. Now, obviously, you just recently returned to Ring of Honor after a long absence from the promotion, and I was just thinking, you're talking about describing your working out and staying in shape. And of course, Ring of Honor is known for work rate, so obviously you have to be in shape to be in Ring of Honor for sure. And
Absolutely.
I guess just your thoughts on returning to the promotion. You've been gone for so long, coming back, working with Roderick Strong, and just kind of the state of where Ring of Honor is today. Obviously, they're owned by Sinclair. They're on some television stations across a nation, and they're getting on more and more stations. They had some trouble with the internet pay-per-view business. So I guess just kind of first, kind of returning to the company, where the company has gone, and maybe the future of Ring of Honor.
Yeah, I'm very excited. It's a work in progress, I think, just because I'm not under contract. But my returning to Ring of Honor was something that, I'll admit, it was pretty nerve-wracking because the work rate, as you mentioned, I would imagine it's the highest work rate there is on the independent level by far. I think the work rate exceeds that of what you would see on TV because the matches last longer. The matches are structured differently. They're structured at a more accelerated pace. I think when you watch wrestling on television, and I mean, the two big companies, you start to see a pattern in the way the matches are set up. And I think that's wrong because it conditions the audience to know what to expect. And I don't feel that you get that with Ring of Honor. I feel that with Ring of Honor, you have to watch. You have to stay watching the set. Because if you look away for a second, you'll miss something phenomenal. You might miss something incredible. You might miss whatever happened to get the crowd start chanting, "This is awesome." Whatever it might be. But you want to stay glued to your set, because what you're going to see in the ring at Ring of Honor is really you're not going to see it anywhere else. PWG tries to come close, I think, but I think they instill a lot more comedy in their style, or at least they have the opening to do that. But with Ring of Honor, it speaks for itself. But with that, it has changed immensely since I was there almost 10 years ago. The office is much different. I didn't recognize anybody in the office. I only knew Kevin Kelly because I knew Kevin Kelly through my days with the Entertainers. I knew Steve Corino, obviously, but other than that, it's like everybody's new, So I was pretty nervous going into it. I was nervous because I hadn't competed in that work rate in quite a while. I was nervous because generally there's a perception that when you're coming off of TV, you're a kind of a phone-in talent, I guess, if that makes sense, where guys will come off of TV and they'll just do enough to get by. Do you understand what I mean?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so it's very common. And so I felt that, coming off of TV and maybe even off of some recent interviews that I had done, the perception was that, maybe I wasn't working as hard or that maybe I wasn't ready. And so, as a competitor, these are all things that I put on myself, on my own mind, these expectations. They're always going to be higher than any human being might possibly put an expectation on me. My expectations will always exceed those. So there's always going to be a built-in pressure that I put on myself just to compete, to be as good as I can be, but to hang in there also, because I know these guys are younger, they're more athletic, they're more innovative. But either way, I got there and, I was extremely excited. And then when I saw I was working Davey Richards, I knew I was going to be in for a fight of my life. If anyone's seen the match, they saw that I almost didn't make it out of there with my life. I think I still have ASICs or something tattooed on my cheek. I'm not really sure. It just went. It was just really balls to the wall, you know what I mean? And that's the attitude I felt I had to bring to it in order to kind of maintain or at least meet the expectation that everyone else had, much less my own. I never meet my own expectations. I'll just say that. But I can come close, I'm not sure if I even answered your question. I think it just started rambling. I'm so sorry.
Well, you're talking about how Ring of Honor has changed in the last 10 years, and obviously we mentioned that ownership has changed. Ring of Honor has been a strong work rate promotion, and we've seen a lot of stars come from Ring of Honor, go on to the bigger companies. I was just thinking Samoa Joe and CM Punk and Daniel Bryan, Evan Bourne, Seth Rollins. So I think to a certain degree, I don't think you want to be in Ring of Honor for too long because of that style that you do work. And obviously it's been a springboard for a lot of stars to jump to the bigger promotions.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
It's brutal.
So it's given them a great opportunity to showcase. I mean, Christopher Daniels, from Ring of Honor as well. I mean, just the amount of talent that's come through Ring of Honor is astonishing.
Oh, it's absolutely, it's flattering to be a part of a company that has such a history behind it already. 10 years. It's already been around 10 years.
Wow.
And so if anything makes me think, man, where did the time go? It's looking at Ring of Honor because all I have to do is pick up an old DVD and see my soft, naive face on the back, and then I look in the mirror and now I'm just like, who is this guy? Who is this guy? But no, you're absolutely right. I like to think back that, during the independence, say in the mid-'90s, early 90s, Ring of Honor was the place where guys like Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, and Chris Benoit would have gone. You know what I mean? Like that's
right.
That's the way I see it. When they were in Japan. But the fact alone that Ring of Honor has its Japanese ties and is able to bring in Japanese stars every now and then, I think says a lot for the company as well, because the Japanese are very particular with who they do business with. And the fact that they've brought in some of these big names. I mean, hell, the match that I was there for, I was not replacing, he's irreplaceable, but I was filling in for Marufuji. Marufuji's phenomenal, I would still like to see that match, Marufuji and Davey Richards. But unfortunately for my face, I filled in for Marufuji and, took the big double stomp from Davey. But, I like to think that each performance that I've given Ring of Honor has been an improvement on the previous one, because I worked Davey, we beat each other up. We had a really good match, I felt, but it wasn't nearly to the level that I would have been happy with. And then I came back and worked Michael Elgin, and I thought that was really, really a hell of a ride. I mean, that was, I was like bucking a bronco. And I thought that was an improvement over the previous. And then my most recent match with Roderick Strong, everyone seems to be pretty high on. Even though watching it back, I'm like, what do I should have done that. Damn, would have done that differently. You know what I mean? It's always
right.
that way. But overall, I'm really happy to be back with the company. I think there's a lot of longevity there for myself. I haven't really even scratched a lot of what I've been able to do. But I've been uncovering a lot of old stones, or turning them over, I guess, and bringing out some old moves out of the repertoire. So I'm excited to see where it'll go. I think I'm set to come back in January for Pittsburgh, and then possibly in San Antonio in February. My idea is to get Ring of Honor to Austin. They air TV here in Austin, but the closest they've come is San Antonio, which is about an hour and a half away, but I'm selfish.
But you did mention the name Eddie Guerrero, and it just, we just had the 8th year since his passing, and
right.
I know you worked with him in WWE. Just I wonder if you could just have a memory, a favorite story of Eddie Guerrero.
Oh, Eddie was the best, man. Eddie made me feel like a part of the locker room when most of the locker room didn't know how to make somebody feel that way. Now, what I mean is a pro wrestling locker room can come off as extremely cliquish, especially when you want the new guys. And so, for the longest time, 2004 into 2005, I really feel like I was still trying to learn my way, because I entered that company extremely naive. You go there with the mindset that, everyone's working for the best company ever. We're all working in pro wrestling heaven. Everyone should be happy and working together, and everyone's just, arm in arms, that we're all up here together. And I couldn't have been farther from the truth. I mean, what a horribly naive mindset to enter with, but I was a positive kid, optimistic kid, So the company will do what it can to crush that really fast. But Eddie was always that guy who made sure that I stayed, fairly inflated and didn't get too discouraged. I remember specifically one time when I had the Cruiserweight Championship, I was extremely frustrated because I felt that the title was directionless. It really was. It always was, actually. And, I went up to Eddie and I said, listen, I don't know how to go about this, but I want to approach Vince with this idea of, and it wasn't the most original idea, but it would have brought a little attention to the division. But basically what I wanted to do was take the title, do the old, throw it in the garbage and burn it kind of thing. The title doesn't mean anything. I don't know why I'm carrying around this 15 pounds of leather and metal, and it doesn't matter, like blah, blah, blah. And reintroduce a new title that was based on style. It was kind of a rip-off of the exterior, the idea of it being style-based as opposed to size-based. But that's what I had to do because Vince is adamant in not using small guys. I just feel that's how he always is, And so I went to Eddie and he said, well, the guy signs your checks, doesn't he? I said, well, I think it's a photocopy, but yeah, it looks like his signature. And he goes, well, then you have just as much of a right than I do or anybody else to go in there and talk to the man. And he just fired me up in like 2 minutes. I was like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. So I charged in there, and he wasn't working or anything, but Eddie just believed in me. He believed in me when I felt that most in that whole environment either believed in me and didn't like what they believed in because they felt that I was a threat, or they just didn't bother because I wasn't gassed up and shredded, or kissing ass. So I think it was easy to overlook me from the office, from a personnel standpoint, not from a talent standpoint. From a talent standpoint, I think it's, hey, we need to keep an eye on this one. It's walking on its own. You know what I mean? This one doesn't need strings or puppeteering. This one's walking on its own. Hey, let's flag this one and keep an eye on that one. So as I charged into Vince's office, not like, bullheaded or anything. I went in there, excuse me, sir, I'd like we need your time. Basically laid out the whole idea. He just looked at me cross-eyed and he's like, I hate it. Well, what do you want? You want to change something? He goes, well, it's not the belt isn't the problem. The title isn't the problem. It's you guys. You guys are also vanilla. And da-da-da-da-da. And it was just, okay. I'll try again some other day.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for listening or pretending to. But it was just, that was Eddie though. Eddie believed in you. If you have heart and if you had a passion for wrestling, he knew it. He could see it. And it's how I am now. I can tell if you have the passion and if you were raised really loving this. If you grew up loving this, I'll know it. If you grew up and you got into this because you wanted to be famous, you wanted to be on TMZ or some bullshit, and you wanted to do in your head think you were going to be rich, I'll know that too. I'll spot that in you. Anyone who's brought up seemingly in an old school fashion, and I like to think that I was because I was brought in by an old timer who just beat the tar out of me and Ivan Putski. I like to think that when you're brought in by an old timer, you're brought in with a certain level of respect, a high level of respect, but it's very specific. And when you meet someone who possibly came in, with ulterior motives or, something else on the brain, you'll see that. Whereas if they come in wholehearted, pure because they love wrestling, you'll see that too. And that was Eddie, and he saw that in me. And that's why, I always gravitated towards him, whether it was for advice, mostly for advice, because I was always yanking my hair out. But I miss him. I miss Eddie so much. The business doesn't have enough Eddie Guerreros, and it never will have another one. But to have good people, that's what the wrestling business highly lacks. It's just good, genuine people, So
it's hard to believe it's been 8 years since he's passed. It's just.
Oh, I saw that on the Twitter feed the other day. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it's been 8 years. I was in Minneapolis. I can't believe it's 8 years. It's just, you don't think about these things. We take so much for granted. I remember being in Minneapolis when it happened. I was with Daivari, and I met up with Mysterio and Gerweck. And the second I met up with Ray was just crushed. He was in tears. I said, Ray, are you okay? What's wrong, buddy? What's wrong? He said, we lost Eddie. And me being an idiot, I was like, well, where'd he go? You know what I mean? Did he leave? It didn't it didn't register that this person's life would actually end. You know, and he said, no, man, we lost him. And, God, it was heavy. That was just so heavy. You know, like Minneapolis isn't cold enough, you know. So, yeah, I miss him. I miss Chris, too. And I really do. Anytime someone says something negative about Chris Benoit, I have to correct them because they don't know him. I'm not saying I knew Chris like everyone else did, but I knew Chris a lot better than most. And, you know, we worked out together and we trained and traveled together, and he helped me immensely, just as much as Eddie, if not more, to be honest with you. And so when people trash him or have to say something negative to him, I have to correct them because there were two completely individuals, the one that committed the crime and the wrestler. They're completely different individuals. So, but I miss them both, man. Wrestling is it can be a real trap if you're not careful. A real trap. So.
You don't buy into the conspiracies with Chris Benoit, do you?
You know, I really don't. I just don't see how they could go about. For a guy that loved wrestling as much as Chris did, I can't see the inner workings and wheels turning in that direction. Because the guy only had wrestling on the brain. And to set up, you know, and I'm not sure which conspiracy theory you're referring to, but I've heard of, you know, Kevin Sullivan, and I've heard this and that.
Right. There's a lot of them. Yeah.
Unfortunately, and I say this with all the love in my heart, I love pro wrestling with everything that I am. It's given me a life. But God, we are not that smart. Pro wrestlers are not that smart. They're not smart enough to devise some sort of grand scheme, you know, framed homicide type situation, not get caught by the police. Now, I'm saying this also, the police in Georgia are probably less smart than the pro wrestling industry as a whole. You know, I'm not saying that the police and detectives in the Georgia area are, you know, Major Gumshoes or Inspector Gadget, but as a whole, pro wrestlers are not, you know, a lot of us have pretty one-track minds. You know what I mean?
Well, you know, the government probably has it on tape somewhere with, you know, tracking with us through the NSA anyways. They probably know.
Oh, I'm sure.
You know,
Here's what I would recommend for anyone that has an idea or an interest in Chris Benoit, I don't know, scandal, tragedy, however you want to call it, is look up this book called Chris and Nancy. And I want to say it's either by Irvin Mushnick. It's not Phil Mushnick. It might be Phil Mushnick. I'm not sure. It's one of these guys who just likes to slay wrestling when he gets a chance. But he put out this book called Chris and Nancy, which was a real in-depth expose on the whole ordeal. And man, did that book just fascinate me, whether it was real or not. You know, there's documents in there of phone records, and, you know, apparently there's a guy in the office at WWE that was speaking with Chris while that was going on, so they knew about it. You know what I mean? This is as close to conspiracy theory as I'll get, I think. But, yeah, if you pick up this book, Chris and Nancy, it's troubling. It's troubling, actually. I had such a bad taste in my mouth for the entertainers that I had just worked for. I had such a bad taste in my mouth after reading this book that I called my manager at the time. I was supposed to do this Hulk Hogan tour in Australia. Do you remember that? It was like a couple of years.
Yes.
It was a disaster.
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah. It never happened.
No, it happened. It shouldn't have, but it happened. That's unfortunately the tour that led to Maga's death, because he came back.
All right.
Yeah, he came back.
I'm thinking of a different tour then. Okay, I know what you're talking about.
No, it's just Hogan and Flair. It was like a Hogan
right.
thing, and I think Flair like broke his hip the first match, and Hogan was, Hogan broke his hip or something. It was just a disaster, So I read this book, and as I was landing in Oakland or wherever I was at the time, I called my manager. I said, "Take me off this tour, please. I don't want to have anything to do with any of these people." Even though none of them had anything to do with the book, I just wanted to get away from. I wanted to detox from pro wrestling for a bit. You know what I mean? I mean that was the magnitude of the impact it had on me. Just because I love this. Sometimes I love this too much. And, it hurts and can hurt me more than any girlfriend I've ever had. You know, I mean, I love her that much, wrestling. You know what I mean? That even if she's the biggest whore, somehow we keep crawling back to her.
I was gonna say, detox from wrestling. That's pretty hard to do.
Oh, it's extremely hard. It's fairly impossible. Which is why Terry's had 43 retirements. Terry Funk,
Right.
I'm sure I will never claim that I'm retiring. I say that I'll just walk away. I'll just disappear. So you'll never hear me say I'm retiring. It's funny too when I see guys on the independent level. I say I'm retiring after 5 years. What are you retiring from? What? Yeah, I always love it. I'm having a big retirement show, this weekend. You've only been in this 4 years. What are you retiring from?
One more thing about Benoit. Did you at any time see any symptoms, any changes in Chris that would even suggest remotely that he would even do anything remotely like this?
Yes.
Okay. Because I've heard people that definitely have said he was a dark person.
Yeah. Well,
he had those tendencies. Not to say he was psychotic and would go home and kill his wife and his son, but people definitely seeing that he was a dark person.
Yeah, of course he was dark. He was extremely dark. Without giving anything really away from all private hangouts or anything, but I did see that. We used to have a joke that Chris was tripolar. Because it was the step above bipolarity. It was like a polarity that no one could understand because it hadn't been registered yet. Because he would flip sometimes. And I like to think that Chris, throughout his career, delved into some form of substance abuse, whether it was from muscle growth or just, getting away mentally. I think most of us have. I myself have personally never taken a steroid or anything that I couldn't get at GNC. I just was never a bodybuilder, and I never was going to fool myself, and I didn't need it when I got there. So why start, kind of thing. But if I'm accurate, steroids can really malfunction the brain. That's where roid rage comes from and all these other kind of symptoms. So I think a combination of Chris's background with steroids, I think a combination of that mixed with a combination of the party wreck kind of substances, whether it be alcohol or something heavier, ecstasy or all the hard drugs, that's a recipe for disaster, when you start mixing all of these different things. Just taking one of them is a recipe for disaster. When you start mixing all these things, I mean, that's a hellacious concoction of substances that can fry your mainframe. I mean, it's literally taking Drano and pouring it on your hard drive, while your computer's on. See what that does to your computer.
Yeah, mixed in with his diving headbutts from the top rope, which didn't help.
Oh
either.
My God, yeah. And if you watch Chris's matches, he connected on every single one of those headbutts. I mean, the guy didn't pull much. He didn't pull anything. I remember one time in a battle royal. Unfortunately, it was one of the closer moments I got with Chris in the ring because they never afforded me the opportunity to wrestle Chris, whether it be as a partner or against. I got to wrestle with and against Eddie Guerrero, and that was some of the highlights of my life. But with Chris, I remember being in a battle royal in Montreal at a house show, and I chopped him. And he just looks at me and goes, "Are you kidding me?" And he just grabs me and throws me to the corner. And man, he chopped me so hard that handprints on my back. I'm not kidding. It was intense. But that was where Chris really taught me about fighting back, finding my openings, but making the best of my openings. He taught me a lot. Chris was amazing. One of the last conversations I ever had with Chris was in the hotel bar in Vienna. In Vienna, actually. He said, "You and Brian are the future here." and not as a team, but competing. That's the feud that this company is going to be built on if they're smart. It's you versus Brian. And he was telling Brian and I this at the end of a tour, and we were just blown away, like, oh my gosh, like one of our heroes is sitting here explaining to us that he believes that we're the next future. We believed that. You know, Brian and I always felt that, but there's only so much you can do when you're not really intertwined in politics. You know, we kind of stayed clear of all that. But yeah, Chris always, you know, he was very high on our work, but I just remember that specifically. He told us, you guys are the future. This is the next money feud. Because the company is smart, this will be the big money feud down the line. So I'll always take that with me. That's always something, that's a feather I'll always keep in my cap, you know. So
yeah. Well, this kind of transitions to my next question, because I was going to ask you, you know, you had the stint with WWE, you were in the Cruiserweight division, you were in the tag team division. Neither one gets a lot of focus. Neither one is emphasized. I guess overall, with your tenure in WWE, do you ever really feel like you got a fair shake with the company?
Yes and no. You know, when I say yes and no, I mean, you know, I got there on my own accord. I worked my ass off to get there. I got there. I was willing to do anything and everything the company asked of me as long as, you know, it didn't, you know, have me out there in some demeaning, you know, lick my ass spot or some upgrade from the kids to my ass spot. Who knows? You know, I mean, I have my,
right.
I'm not too big of a whore, you know what I mean? But you know, I think there was definitely a level of maturity that I had not reached yet, that worked against me, because everything was new to me, the money, the travel, in the sense of the accelerated travel, and the constant work rate. You know, you're literally unpacking your bags just to repack them. You know, when you get home, you don't have time to detox from the road. You don't. The second you start to regain your sense of smell and taste, you're on the road again. So it was a massive adjustment, and I did the best I could. But, you know, were there things I would have definitely done differently? Absolutely. Were there ways I would have conducted myself differently business-wise? Absolutely. So to put all the blame on them and say, oh, they didn't give me a fair shake, or they didn't treat me, you know, with respect or this or that, you could look at it that way. But on the other side of it, you know, there were definitely decisions I think that I could have made differently, which, you know, could have endeared them, you know, at least let them see me in a more positive light or in a more useful light. You know, I'm ashamed that I let myself get discouraged as many times as I did when I was up there, but I think it's just because I just cared so much and I loved it so much, and it was not turning out to be the dream that I had had as a little kid. And I always likened it to Training Day, that movie Training Day, you know, with Ethan Hawke and Denzel. And I always told people, I'm Ethan Hawke in this scenario, because I'm just, you know, happy to be there, anxious, really ready to work hard, real eager beaver. And this can't be how it is. This, you know, I don't know how many times Ethan Hawke says that to himself in the radio. He's just in disbelief. He's like, it can't be this way. I can't imagine that this is how it is. But that's how it was for me. You know, it was just a massive wake-up call, and an eye-opener. I'm just sitting here thinking, man, I'm not sure I really like these people anymore. You know, I wish I had never met them, and that way I could still maintain that level in my head of these are my heroes. But after I hung out with a good amount of those heroes of mine, I was disgusted. You know, I didn't want to be their fan anymore. You know, so call it what you want. You know, maybe I have too much pride. That's always been the knock on Shane Douglas, although I'm sure there's a lot of other knocks. But I'm not saying I patterned my career after him, but it was weird. I was looking at it. I was thinking about it the other day, because I was originally scheduled to go up and meet and train with Shane Douglas when I first got into wrestling. That's why I went up to school in Pittsburgh, because I was set to train with Shane Douglas. I'd spoken to him on the phone and this and this and this. But he was always a wrestler who I admired. But I always read about, you know, the mistakes that he had made, you know, because he had too much pride. He wasn't a good businessman. And, you know, he overspoke when he, you know, maybe should have kept his mouth shut and this and this. And I was thinking about it. I was like, man, there's a lot of similarities. You know, there's a lot of parallels here where people look at me and think, oh, there's this guy who was hard to work with, or whatever the perception is, or, he asked questions when he shouldn't have, or, it wasn't, whatever the perceptions are, but it was odd to me. It was odd. I think you need to maintain some level of pride, a high level of pride, but it's a tight wire act too, because too much pride can burn you, and I'm definitely guilty of that, where I don't want to work for that asshole. He screwed me over a couple weeks ago or last year or whatever. No, I'm not working for him. And then my other bookings fall out, and then it's like, oh, I should have taken that, should have sucked out my pride and worked for them. Now I'm out of a booking. Just shit like that. But yeah, pride gets in the way a lot of times. And but at the same time, I'd rather have too much pride than none at all.
It's funny. I was just looking at your notes here, and it says you were released on November 7th, 2008, which is just a week ago was 5 years since you departed the company. And I just listened to another interview you were doing. You said you weren't surprised you were released. They really weren't using you. It was kind of surprising that they would even hang on to you and just give you a paycheck. So, when things ended with the company, what were you told? Were you kind of encouraged to, continue wrestling, stay in contact? Do you think the door is open? And do you ever think there will be a chance we'll see you in WWE ever again?
Absolutely not. I can't say never, because it's such a silly word that, none of us are, it's such an arrogant word, never. How can you know that,
Right,
so,
right. They could have a creative meeting and somebody says, hey, I got an idea for Paul London. I mean, you don't expect it, but, you never know.
Let's throw him $750,000 a year. That sounds good.
Why not?
Well, my initial return price was $1 billion.
They're a multi-billion-dollar corporation, right?
Yeah, that's what I figured. The writing was kind of on the wall for the last few years that I was there. I thought that there was always kind of an undercurrent that I could go at any time just because I wasn't one of their investments. And that came in varying degrees of, you're not as important here as you might think you are. This is us telling you. You know what I mean? One of the most glaring moments was, and I'll get to your question in a second, was when they literally removed Brian and I from the video game that we were already put in. Vince had us removed from the video game and had Crime Time inserted into our spot. Now, this is after he had just fired Crime Time temporarily. So they took people that were currently fired and replaced us in a video game with a tag team that wasn't as over, didn't have near the work rate that we did, but it was just because of personal preference and because he didn't like us. So if something like that doesn't discourage you and make you just want to punch holes in the wall, much less your boss's face, because that's a $60,000 paycheck right off the bat, not to mention the residuals from a video game. But that's generally, you're probably not going to get less than $40,000 in one check. Your first check is a lump of $40,000 when you get a video game. So when that's taken out of our hands, just because of personal preference bullshit, makes you really start, that anger starts to build.
Yeah, I would say.
So, mind you, for a team that's not even currently employed, that's bad. And I think we were the tag champs at the time, so
nice.
Just bring your bags of salt, because the wounds are right here and there. Just go ahead and cake it in there. But, when I was released, I had just moved to California, to Los Angeles, to really heavily pursue my career as an actor. That's part of what was a bit of the downfall for me with the entertainers was I realized, hey, you guys aren't going to use me in matches. You guys are never really going to, there I'm with that word never. You guys aren't going to invest in me. See what you're doing with Brian. I'm really happy for him, but, where's my little bit of cinnamon, you know what I mean? Didn't happen. So I presented Johnny Ace with this idea, and I said, listen, it's obvious you guys aren't, I'm not going anywhere. Take advantage of that, and how about I go to film school? You guys can send me to New York Film Academy. They have an 8-week or I think 12-week program, some sort of intensive. Send me to their intensive film school. Let me get a lot of these bare bones basics on how to be a filmmaker down. I'm already writing. You know, I've been a writer my whole life. My brother's in the film industry. He's a director, producer, writer. Send me to film school and let me become your in-house film developer for all the talent. Because at the time they put out movies that had tent poles. They thought they could make tent poles out of their talent. You know, if we put Cena on the marquee, it doesn't matter if the movie sucks because it's Cena. If we put, you know, so-and-so on the cover, it doesn't matter if these movies suck because they're all just about, you know, trying to make these guys household names. Well, that didn't work either. So I thought, well, you know, let's see. See No Evil is your most successful movie, followed by Condemned. Kane and Stone Cold are marquee guys, so they're kind of already household names in a way, especially Stone Cold. Here's a concept. Why don't you put more than one talent in your films? I'm not saying they all have to be leads or that any of them should be leads. But if you have known actors, movie stars, or at least uprising stars, but people who are actors, trained actors as your leads, that will get the people in the door. You sprinkle your wrestlers and your talent in smaller supporting roles throughout the film. You know, even if it's just Funaki as the hot dog salesman on the corner of Manhattan, you know, or whatever, downtown Manhattan, you know, even if he's just the hot dog vendor, something, you know what I'm saying, cameos. That's how you integrate these guys into the film. You don't give them the whole film to carry on their back because none of them can do it. You give them little bits here and there, almost like small snippets, almost like giving them slight little vignettes for whatever character they are. Does that make sense to you?
I think that's a good idea because they have WW Studios. Obviously, they have the talent. I don't know if it's just they don't want to take them off the road. They want to take them off television but a lot of the guys who they barely, like when they had Funaki, they barely used the guy.
Well,
so yeah, why not put him in a movie? Why not? You're paying them anyways, right?
Well, put them in little parts. You know what I mean? Don't put the weight of the whole film on these guys' shoulders. None of them can carry it, obviously, because they ended up taking all their films out of movies and going straight to video. You know, that was their next best thing. Was we can get off the video market. That's who watches our crappy movies, anyways. But either way, they hated the idea. Johnny hated the idea. He was like, "Oh, that's and he just, you know, every excuse you could think of. You know, it's just like. He just didn't like the idea, right? I think it was more so because he just didn't like me. But anyway, I said, screw it, I'm going to do it anyways. So I moved to L.A., and, you know, several months later, he called me up, and I was injured at the time. That was another thing that why they weren't using me is because I was injured. I hurt my back wrestling Lance Cade. You know, rest in peace. I miss Lance, too. But I wrestled Lance, and I hurt my back really, really bad. And so they actually released me while I was injured. They asked me to come down to Anaheim, which was about 2 hours away from where I was living at the time, just to drug test me. So I said no to that because I thought that was disrespectful. And that kind of played against me too, I think, because when old raspy voice called me, you know, he was like, "Oh, well, you know, just don't know if your heart's in it anymore. You know, you're talking about doing movies and this and this. And, you know, you didn't even come down to the TV a couple weeks ago that we had, you know, we're a couple hours from you." And it's like, "Johnny, you know I didn't come down there because it's a witch hunt." You know what I mean? He's like, "Oh, well, this and this." You know, they always have excuses, you know. But I knew the writing was on the wall when I wrestled Charlie Haas in Baltimore, and I did a shooting star onto him, and the place erupted. That was, I think, my last match, actually. Dog match, of course. And I came to the gorilla position after the match. The place was still rocking from this finish. And Johnny looks at me and goes, "What are you doing? That's Evan Bourne's move." And I said, "What? Who?" And he goes, "Evan Bourne." I go, "That kid's on ECW. This is SmackDown. This is Raw. It's completely different." He goes, "Well, the people will get confused." And I go, "Confused?" This is all in gorilla position in front of, like, the office. I'm like, "Confused? What are you talking about? Like Van Damme and Guerrero? Like people get confused and they feuded over the Frog Splash?" "No, Johnny, no." He goes, "You can't do it anymore." I just stormed off. I was furious. You know, the kid who's just been here for slightly the time it takes to have a cup of tea already is getting precedent over me, who's been here 6 years. Like, that was the ultimate slap in the face, really, or the most glaring one at that moment. And I like Seidel. He's a buddy of mine. We actually grieved together at my house with Jimmy Yang Wang when the Benoit thing went down, because they canceled SmackDown and they released us all to go our separate ways for the day. And they said, you can come back Tuesday for a live SmackDown taping, and it's all voluntary. And none of us, we ended up not going, but yeah, I actually really liked Seidel. It was he and Jimmy Yang Wang and myself. We went back up to my house and just kind of tried to wrap our heads around everything. But either way, that was kind of the end for me at WWE, because I explained that to Johnny when he released, and I said, well, you're sitting here telling me I can't do this move, and he's like, oh, well, everyone there is such a coward that it's always, well, that's coming from this person, not from me. You know what I mean? No one can ever take any responsibility for anything there. Anything. It's always, that's coming from so-and-so. It's coming from the boss. It's coming, you know what I mean, or whatever it is. And
pass the buck.
Oh, it's pathetic how afraid these guys are of this guy.
Let me ask you this. Obviously, you're not there anymore, but you, of course, worked with Triple H, and Triple H is now transitioning into, I guess, Vince's role as being the power broker in WWE, him and, of course, his wife, Stephanie, and Vince's daughter. But your thoughts on that transition, and what changes do you anticipate when kind of Triple H is fully in charge of the company?
Well, that's another reason I'm pretty sure I will not be returning there anytime soon, if again. Hunter was always pretty glaringly, obviously jealous of certain individuals. I'm not saying he was jealous of me, but I could tell he was envious of Van Dam. He was extremely envious of Van Dam's success. He was envious of Van Dam's personality. He was envious of the way that everyone gravitated towards Rob because they liked being around Rob. He was very positive. And the most glaring is that, the work rate. Hunter's had the same matches his whole career, And the way I've seen it, if a guy is so damn tough, why does he need a sledgehammer all the time? I mean, honestly, why does he need a sledgehammer?
I've had that argument with so many people. How do you, from a wrestling fan perspective, how do you buy a sledgehammer? I mean, a sledgehammer could kill somebody.
Yeah, how do you
why don't you just have a gun?
Yeah, and how do you justify why this guy is such a badass if he always has a weapon? I just think it's absurd. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to say something. Hunter always kept a thumb on me because he knew that I was kind of more of like a Rob type guy. I was one of Rob's guys. I was kind of hanging out with Rob. And so I think, like, for example, I remember seeing Van Dam get in Hunter's face. Hunter made a smart remark at a meeting about Rob having the munchies or something like that, trying to pop the audience or trying to pop the room. Well, Hunter's kind of like that nerd who throws out a joke expecting the room to start laughing, but he ends up being the only one kind of laughing at his own joke. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
He's that guy. So he made this munchie comment in a meeting one time and chuckled to himself, expecting everyone else to just erupt and laugh, but nobody did. And Rob, met up with him, or, confronted him after and was like, hey, are we friends? Are we boys? Can you make jokes like that to me? Are we close? I don't think so, Oh, no, Rob, I'm just making a comment. He was like, and Rob got in his face. And it was great to just see Hunter just cower, just shrink, because he knew he'd have gotten his ass whipped, just totally whipped. So fast forwarding to your question, Hunter's obviously moved himself into this position because he knows that his ring work lacks. He knows that if he continues to wrestle, he's just going to expose himself more and more, especially with the new talent that's coming in. Danielson and, like, all the guys in the Shield and all that stuff. I mean, phenomenal wrestlers. They're going to expose the hell out of him. So I think he knows this, and he wants to keep himself on top. So that's why he's putting himself in a position of power more than he already has. I mean, the guy married his way into the company. But the thing I think is the funniest and most telling thing about Triple H is that, I don't know if you remember a couple years ago, I think it was THQ, they released the memo that WWE had sent them when they were supposed to promote their game, saying you can promote it all you want. Show pictures, stills of the game, everything. The one thing you can't do is show wrestler Triple H, because they had to clarify to THQ, because THQ is like, I don't know who the fuck this is. You can show any pictures, you just cannot show wrestler Triple H in a helpless or defenseless manner. So they're protecting this prick in the video games. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And THQ, I think, went around and just said, okay, screw it, and did a still of him in a helpless or defenseless manner anyways, because they thought it was ridiculous. And I think that's maybe what ended the partnership with the last video game maker that did all their games and everything. I might be way off, but that was, I think it's pretty accurate if I remember correctly. It doesn't surprise me just because I know how Hunter is. But I just think he's really bad for business. I mean, he's really good for that company because that company is in its own little bubble. But he wouldn't survive in wrestling outside of WWE. There's no way. There's no way. You know, you never saw him in Japan or international, you know, anywhere. He was always tucked up right next to the boss. You know, even in WCW he tried. So, yeah, I'm not a big fan. But yeah, they just said, you know, we can't come up with anything for you. That same kind of generic excuse. Right. But I think, you know, shouldn't you fire writers? Isn't that what you're hiring them for? You're hiring your writers to write stuff. So if they can't come up with stuff for everybody, why don't you fire them? They're the ones not doing their job.
Yeah, when I hear that somebody has nothing for you, it's like your job is to come up with something for you.
Yeah, you obviously aren't doing the creative part.
Yeah, that's true. You're getting paid to be creative, to come up with something.
Pretty sure.
Storyline.
Yeah, your title
for this person.
Creative.
That's why I hired you, right? That's why I hired you, right?
What are you hiring me for? Oh, creative. Oh, shoot. You mean I got to be creative? Oh, darn it. You know what I mean? You mean
used to be, you know, being soap opera writers or whatever shows they come from. They don't understand. That's another thing. They don't understand. I mean, they come from entertainment world, and you talk about, you know, WWE's entertainers, but what about the wrestling side, you know?
Yeah, I mean,
where's the storylines? Where's the? I mean, that. And this ties into the last question I was going to ask you is, you know, do you watch the product today and what you think of it? Because I don't know about you, but I just think we've been in a very stale period in wrestling for a long time, and I think as a result of WWE buying ECW, WCW, and obviously TNA has been there. They just really have not become a rival, have not become really competition to WWE, and since we've really lost the competition element of wrestling, we've really lost that creative edge, the NWO angles, you know, Stone Cold against Vince McMahon, you know, during the Monday Night Wars, and now we're just seeing and then on top of it, we got 3 hours of Raw, we got 2 hours of Impact, we got 2 hours of SmackDown, we got main event, we got Superstars, we got NXT. It's just like, I don't know, just what's your overall thoughts on the product? Do you watch it, and where do you see wrestling going? I mean, we've just been in this very long period of staleness in wrestling.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. You know, I don't watch it. If anything, I tune in and I catch the Ring of Honor show on my DVR.
But other than that, no, it's completely oversaturated. I think WWE realizes, or slowly realizing, that they've kind of shot themselves in the foot by eliminating all their competition, because now they think, oh, we're the only game in town, theoretically. But I think that exposes why their matches are so boring, because they're sitting here thinking, okay, we need to recondition the audience to expect less. Does that make sense?
Right.
Because I think they themselves innately feel that they can't replicate or match the success of the Attitude Era or prior. They aren't getting the stars coming in. They aren't getting the actual wrestlers coming in. And I think that's why they've really flocked to the independents now, and they've really started plucking all these guys out of the independents, because they're sitting there thinking, oh, we need to get wrestlers brought up more the traditional sense for the independents and this and that. Now, at the same time, I've had friends who were just really solid wrestlers and just looked wrestlery, who they told them, "You're too wrestlery. We don't want you." So, I don't think they have any clue what they want. I think that they're constantly grabbing straws. The other show on TV is unwatchable. Impact, that is completely unwatchable. I caught a few minutes of that a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to gouge my eyes out. We had a guest over, and she was watching wrestling because she's a wrestler. My roommate's a wrestler and a promoter, and my other roommate's a referee. So we have wrestlers in and out here all the time, and they're watching whatever. There's always wrestling on a TV in this house somewhere. But I came downstairs, and Impact was on, and I thought I'd amuse myself. I think it was Sabin and Jeff Hardy or something, but I just couldn't watch it. I couldn't watch Dixie Carter putting her face all over it was just disgusting. I was like, change it. Just change it. I'd rather watch Nancy Grace.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't. I think I
That's
put in,
bad.
Yeah.
If you don't get the joke, that's bad because Nancy Grace is.
I put in a tape of Ultimate Warpath, or Primal Warpath. This is an independent wrestler who gave me a cassette tape to give to Vince. But obviously, I never did that. I just kept it because I'm a jerk. I can't watch any of that stuff on TV. It's frustrating to watch. Also, what's frustrating is, seeing these guys that I described who got into wrestling to be famous. Seeing those kind of personalities get worse because you can just see the smugness on these guys that don't care that they're not putting in good matches. They just care that they're quote unquote TV stars. You know what I mean? I just think it's a bunch of nonsense. Where are the good matches? You know what I mean? You never hear anything about TV matches that people are like, oh man, you have to catch this match. It's match of the year candidate. Oh my God, it had me hooked. You never hear that about anything on TV from TNA or WWE. You never hear that. And if you hear anything, it's, oh man, I don't know why I watched the pay-per-view. It was basically just an extended Raw, or it was a glorified SmackDown. It's been that way for years.
Yes.
For years. They just give these matches away.
Yep.
It's a crime. It is a crime. You want to condition the audience, condition them that way, to where they have to buy the pay-per-view to see the marquee match. Just give it away. Nobody buys the pay-per-views anymore because they just know they're going to see it the next night. That is really, really bad. I mean, that is extremely bad for business because nothing means anything anymore.
Yeah, you pay $55 for the match, and the next night they give it to you for free.
For free,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, it's like, okay,
you don't get
$55 down the drain, right?
And you don't get the title switch of the pay-per-view. You get it for free on Raw.
Right, of course.
It's utter nonsense. It's utter nonsense. And, I'm not saying, they all have, that it's just, I just don't watch it. That's what I'll say. I just don't watch it. Thankfully, I live in a wrestle house where I have access to everything. I mean, literally everything, So I've been watching a lot of, White Castle of Fear with Big Van Vader and Hulk Hogan and Dungeon of Doom and all. I like to watch stuff that reminds me of why I got into wrestling, not stuff that makes me shake my head and wish that I was doing something else. You see the difference?
Absolutely, and I think that's the bottom. You said the bottom line. I think just today it's unwatchable. I talk to fans all the time. It's just you watch Raw, you watch SmackDown sometimes. Maybe if I. And it's funny too when I talk to wrestlers or people in the business, and I say, "Do you watch Raw? Do you watch him?" Almost everybody says no.
That's
very few say, "Oh yeah, I watch him. I might flick it every now and then to see what's going on," but nobody watches on a weekly basis for sure.
No, and it's frustrating for independent wrestlers to watch it because they're trying to get there, and they're seeing all these guys do nothing. You know what I mean? That they can do, and so I'm sure all the independent guys that are watching that are really itching to get up there, sitting there thinking, man, I can do this 10 times better than this guy, or I look 10 times better than this guy. but yet the message that gets delivered is you either need to be a skank or a roid freak or some sort of monster. It's like one of those options, either a skank, a roid freak, or some other kind of gelatinous monster. Those are the things that they're looking for. Or you're some sort of massive freak of nature, with like 5 legs. That's the stuff they're looking for. So if you're an independent wrestler who actually really has talent and who literally came up because you loved it, and that's why you're doing this, because you loved it, you don't care about the money or any of this crap, because you genuinely love it, you're going to yank your hair out watching this stuff on TV because you're going to sit there confused week in and week out on what it is that they're looking for because they themselves, like I said, don't even know.
And that about sums it up. Paul, I know you have to run. Before you go, you can plug your upcoming...
I have a few things to plug real quick.
Social media, how promoters can get in contact you to book you for shows and appearances, seminars you're doing?
Yes.
So go right ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you can. I'm not the biggest socialite when it comes to media. I'm not on Facebook. I have lots of fake Facebooks, but I am very much on Twitter. My official Twitter is @LondonFu, LONDONFU. It's like for Kung Fu, not for, hey, London, F you, man. It's not like that. It's just London FU for London Fu. That has my booking email on it, as well as an email for my wrestling school. I have since adopted a wrestling school here in Austin, Texas, that I am currently training the class that I adopted and took over for, but I am officially relaunching in January my professional wrestling school. It's going under a name change and just a complete reworking. But I'm going to start integrating my students into shows. The shows will feature, myself. Occasionally I'll have Brian down here in addition to various Ring of Honor talent that makes himself available, or other talent that I feel is worthy enough to put on a solid show for the audience. But I have very high standards, which is why I like to filter my students into the shows that I will start running. Brian Kendrick runs weekly shows on Wednesday nights in the Los Angeles area, and it's generating a good amount of buzz. It gives a lot of the local guys who don't get chances to be on the regular shows, PWG and some of these bigger marquee shows, it gives them a chance to work on their craft in front of a live audience. And so I'm trying to do the same thing here in Austin, and possibly down the line we'll be able to do some talent exchanges. Not that we're trying to recreate territories by any means. I mean, that would be ideal. But the goal is to really give upcoming wrestlers a structure and a bit of a template that they can look at and say, okay, this is what the big companies look for, and or, this is where I can go to work on being a heel because I'm so used to being a babyface, or whatever it is. But it's basically affording talent opportunities to come and work on their craft. So I'm playing with the idea of my wrestling school being under the title of a laboratory, because I feel that a pro wrestler's lab opens it up to, hey, come here and try. Come here and experiment. Come here and make mistakes. This is where you want to make mistakes, is that training. And it's something I've been doing, seminars internationally. I've been doing that for several years now. And it's really where my passion is starting to transition into. I've always loved teaching. I minored in education when I was in college in hopes of being a teacher at some point. And I just really love being able to share information. I think I'm a pretty good communicator, and I care. I really care about everyone that puts in the effort. If you show the effort and you show up to training, you're going to get all of my attention and then some. And it's very hands-on, and it's very intensive. It's not a school for lazy people. It's not a school for people that aren't committed or who that just want to be famous or any things that I've spoken against. It's a gym for wrestlers. And if you don't know how to wrestle, you're going to learn. And I'm going to teach you how to wrestle before I teach you anything else. Because at the end of the day, what is the common word on the marquee for any wrestling show? It's wrestling.
Wrestling.
It's wrestling.
Wrestling.
It's wrestling.
Still wrestling.
That's it. I can't tell how many times kids will show up and like, hey, can you teach me the 450? Shoot around, and teach me. It's like, well, I can. Yeah, I absolutely can. But can you show me a hammer lock? And I look at you and it's like, well, let's get started. You know what I mean? You can't build a house, you know, starting with the roof. It just doesn't make sense. It just does not make sense. You have to have a solid foundation, period. And from that, you can build on anything. So my pro wrestling school is here in Austin. The email address is plprodojo@gmail.com. That's plprodojo@gmail.com. I'll be doing an official launch in January. With the class, you'll be, you know, I'll go over everything with you. You'll be on camera doing promo work. When students start getting more and more advanced and getting ready to be on shows, we'll start developing vignettes for them, for their characters. I think we're going to try and, I'm going to be going to Australia next week for a month to do seminars and shows and to promote a company that I'm working with and co-promoting out there called Outback Championship Wrestling. You can find them online at ocwaus.com or on Twitter as well at OCWAUS. It's Outback Championship Wrestling, AUS for Australia. But those are things I'm doing over the rest of the year. Doing a big toy drive in Australia where fans can bring toys to the shows and they'll get a voucher for a meet and greet with Brian Kendrick and myself, as well as a special autograph picture. And we're going to donate these toys to needy children for Christmas time in Australia. So I'm really, really excited about that. That's something I'm really itching to get over there and do. I'll be back in mid-December. And then I think I have a few more dates at the end of 2013. And then come 2014, it's really going to focus mostly on the wrestling school. I'll still be taking a bunch of international dates and domestic dates, but the focus and emphasis of my 2014 and moving forward will be the wrestling school. So get the word out, everybody. If you know somebody that's had a dream in pro wrestling. And my motto also, my theory is everyone has something to offer. Every single person has something to offer in pro wrestling. It just may not be in the ring. So I will find something that you can do. I will find your strengths, and we will play up those strengths. I will find your weaknesses, and we'll work on those weaknesses. But I assure you, we will find a place for you. You do have something to offer. I just cannot guarantee that it will be in the ring. I hope that it is, but if it's not, we'll definitely find a place for you.
Well, that's awesome, and we do appreciate your time. You've been somebody I've been meaning to get in contact with for a long time to set up an interview, and I'm glad we got this opportunity today to talk. Look forward to doing a part 2 with you, because I definitely got some more questions for you. So somewhere down the line, we'll definitely hook up again. And this may sound a little corny, but to quote a WWE, I kind of wish you the best in all future endeavors, including your wrestling school and your bookings, and wish you nothing but the best.
Thanks. Maybe the school should be called Endeavors. Yeah, it might sound like a strip club, though. I think I don't know. It's weird.
Thanks, Paul. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Anytime.